That was a very rich presentation, and between Professor Yuan and Professor Cao, we are fully impressed, or we learned a great deal about the dynamics of higher education in China, how that it's a elite university embedded in a fast-changing environment and striving to articulate its vision of excellence, which of course makes Tsinghua's challenge somewhat different from Berkeley's challenge, namely that ours is a public university, confident up to a point of our achievement and trying to serve a domestic constituency for the state of California. But then what we share, of course, is the connections across the Pacific in this globalizing moment. So to hear more about the Berkeley story, we turn to John Douglas. John is a senior research fellow at the Center for Studies in Higher Education, and he came to the center after serving as a senior analyst in the office of the UC president, correct? Correct. Okay. John's research focuses on the student experience in research universities, the role of universities in economic development, and significantly for today's panel, the influence of globalization on higher education around the world, including China. John is a strong advocate of the importance of universities collecting its own data, doing its own research about itself, and using such research as a tool of measurement as well as decision-making with regard to its articulation of excellence. John is the author of this book entitled The California Idea and American Higher Education, published by Stanford University in 2000. This work has been translated into Chinese in 2007 with a special preface, and my understanding is that is the book that informs our Chinese-speaking colleagues about this whole thing called the California Master Plan. So, John, please.
Okay, let's see. Let's see. It's a. How do you go down there? Oh, okay. That's the final slide. Which do I go to? Do I go all the way back? Is that? There we go. Oh, what's up? What's up for? Thanks for helping me with this. There we go. All right. There we go. My initial slide. Well, thank you very much, Professor Ye, for that kind introduction, and it's really great to be here, and I've already learned a lot, and so I think my title, actually it's fortuitous that I'm the last person to talk, perhaps, because partly what I want to talk about is this process of evaluating and understanding what these kinds of reforms in general education or liberal education, how do we understand what effects they're having on universities. And so anyway, first I'm going to talk about a few broad issues. I do think we have a lot of shared interests. In other words, major research universities have a certain environment that is different than, as Jed noted, we have all of these liberal arts colleges. Even private universities have different kinds of structures and environments here in the United States compared to public universities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. This is my first section. I have 3 little sections in my paper. First, I'm going to talk on broad issues, and then I'm going to talk about a project we're doing here at Berkeley, and that I would hope might interest some of you, some of our Chinese colleagues. So first, I just want to mention a few things that I think are ways of looking at global changes facing research universities. And they vary, they don't always apply. There's some differences between, say, Japan and California, or California and China, obviously. But there are some things we are experiencing. One is a rising demand for access, and this is particularly true in nations that are growing in population. And California, for example, is growing in population. We're seeing a kind of a general pattern of declining support by governments relative to costs. Increases in this is often resulting, and it isn't here in California, but throughout the U.S., particularly in the public sector, increases in student-to-faculty ratios and larger classes. Questions related to affordability and rising fees and tuition, this new model that we're moving towards pretty universally to raise monies in the light of declining state support. Increased government and public demands for accountability at the same time about what quality our programs are and what kind of outcomes we produce. Rising interest in measuring learning outcomes, I said that twice. Continuing concern about the social and economic impact of universities. There are other things that we could discuss, but that's at least some things, and many of these relate to what I'm going to talk about more. In California, I think we're facing this kind of a conundrum. Some places in the world perhaps are doing more with more, and that means more money and producing more, right? Then there are some that are doing much more with much more, and I think there are some examples of that, usually kind of segmented by certain research universities, and whether it's in Germany or whether it's in China, that are getting special funds to elevate their profile and their research productivity. And then there's doing much more with much less, and my California colleagues will know what I mean by that. We're constantly seeing decreases in public funding and resources available, yet increasing demands that we do much more with less. And I would say we're kind of getting maybe at a point of fatigue a little bit on this. How can we do this? Because we keep facing very monumental difficulties with resources, and this is particularly true in the last 2 years. It's a very long story. But to kind of boil it down, despite that environment, we all need to think in a certain kind of way. How to improve the quality and productivity and prestige of our research universities. That's a shared value. We saw it with Tsinghua. It's something we share. And what I would say is, well, the answer is recreating and sustaining a culture of self-improvement. In other words, it's not just about us reaching some peak and then stopping, that we always have to be looking for ways to improve what we do. There is no university that cannot that can avoid that paradigm. They must do that. And the corollary I like to say in this, which relates to the introduction, is that, we can wait for external pressures to help us do those kinds of things, and we're seeing that everywhere, whether it's China or whether it's in England or in the U.S., but really when it comes down to it, it's the internal culture of the institution and its understanding of that to drive the mission to improve itself. It's not going to be externally derived, or that won't be the thing that makes the big difference. It will be the internal culture and efforts of the institutions themselves, the staff, the faculty, and I would add the students, too, to that equation. So one thing I like to note is that there's been a lot of focus on how universities become prestigious or how they become world-class, and it's really been a focus on the role of the faculty in what is known broadly as the three missions of research universities, which is teaching, research, and community service. That's been a traditional concept of the public university, in particular in the United States, since the mid-1800s. And so now I think we're beginning to look at the other side of the equation. That first part of the equation, the Jiaotong rankings, are all focused on the faculty productivity, how many Nobel laureates and all that, and that's good. But we really need to think about this other side of the equation, and that is, what is it that students add or contribute or get out of that teaching, research, and community service role? And it's not just a receiving kind of proposition. It also relates to their role as producers and contributors to an academic community. And I think when you look at general education and these things, it's not just a one-way street. It's how do you create an academic culture that's productive and reiterative and self-supporting. So, now, I can boil down, this is very crude, but one can boil down and say that there are kind of three things that go on in research universities that they have to deal with related to students. One is we're concerned about the preparation of students and access, admissions policy. Who are we admitting? Are we only admitting the top scorers, people who have amazing exams? Are we talking about people that have life experiences or overcome hardships and have other kind of creative abilities? So that's one side of it. The other is the practice of education itself, how we deliver it, what kind of innovations we have, what kind of curriculum reform. So the excellent presentation we just heard about Tsinghua, or the two of them actually, showing about what creative things they're doing to change the curriculum, drive reforms. Those are all part of that, right? Not just the practice, but other things that we keep inventing new ways of doing things, trying to be better, self-improvement. Then the question is, well, how do we evaluate their effects? What kind of process do we understand whether something is a good practice or a bad practice? And anecdotal type of approaches are usually the norm in institutions, but I'm arguing, and some of my colleagues that I'm working with are working more on the international side to say, well, we really need to look at the institutional research capability of institutions themselves to understand what they're doing and what effects there are in, say, curricular reforms. So this is just this kind of little model that shows you that concept, that you've got those two things. And I include admissions in it as well, because we are doing work in which we're trying to understand what does the admissions practices that we have, how does that affect the student body we have, what's their behaviors. So, for example, we've looked at whether students who have super high test scores are academically and civically engaged. It's an important question, isn't it? And guess what we found? There are actually a lot of students who are really high scores. This is in the California system, right? This is our environment here, that are not very academically or civically engaged. They're very good narrow. They're very narrow in there, and they're excellent in that way, but they aren't taking full advantage of the environment of the university. That's not to put a quality on it. It's just an observation, okay? But it feeds into our concept. What are we doing in our admissions practices, and what kind of students do we get into the system, and how do they contribute to the institutional mission and things like self-improvement? So now I'm going to mention a few things very quickly that Berkeley is doing. They're going through a series of processes, including looking at learning outcomes and what expectations there are of students. But I thought I should at least mention this before I talk a little bit about some of the survey work and things that we're doing to look at student success and different kinds of things of that nature, how they're doing, how they react to various reforms. So one is that Berkeley says that they are attempting, these are these kind of, not a complete list, but a listing of various goals that they have in order to improve the undergraduate experience and improve outcomes. One is this, obviously searching for ways to evaluate and promote excellence and innovation in teaching. Another is to make sure we're aligning institutional goals with the curriculum. That is, I think you're doing that at Tsinghua, but it's a constant process that you have to kind of look. Curriculums grow in various ways, and sometimes do they align with the missions and the purposes of the institutions? It's not an easy question. It's something, though, you have to keep your eye on. Undergraduate participation in research is a goal for the University of California, and we see a lot of very positive outcomes from that. We have some evaluations of that. Expand opportunities for international education, such as we're seeing at Tsinghua. Opportunities to serve local communities. Help students succeed academically, be active participants. It's easier said than done, but to make sure you're monitoring them and supporting them in their developing their goals, and many who want to go on to graduate school. And facilitating learning outcomes after graduation, or towards graduation, that is, to make sure that they go and they graduate in a timely way. So those are just some things that are articulated as formal policy. Now I'm going to switch and talk about the evaluation side. And this relates to a project that I'm a co-PI on with some colleagues here at the University of California. And we call it the Student Experience in the Research University Project and Consortium. And we started with a group of the 9 undergraduate campuses of the University of California that you see listed. But we now have a total of 16 members. All our additional members are members of the AAU UC has 4 members of the AAU, if I remember correctly. And so, we have 11 members total of AAU in the American Association of Universities. And this consortium is based at the Center for Studies in Higher Education. Now, the kinds of things that we're trying to do as a consortium is to promote greater evaluation and to create new data sources to evaluate the student experience and to integrate them into both policy, so how does Berkeley operate, and we're being successful with that, and we're also trying to promote scholarly research on the undergraduate experience as well. So it's both a two-prong goal. So in the consortium, what we've got our group doing is we collaborate a lot, sharing approaches to developing institutional research capabilities, sharing challenges and reforms in curriculum and teaching, seeking best practices, techniques for assessing the student experience and learning outcomes, applications for policy making, and one of the most apparent that is used is the process of program review. So program review is very important for the University of California, and it's been a major contributor to the development of high-quality institutions. That's a process of about every 8 years or so. An academic department is reviewed at the campus-wide level, often with an outside review team, or almost always with an outside review team. And so the data that is produced through one of the products of the SERU Consortium, which is a student survey, is a very important component in that. So the other component is every member administers a version of this survey to all of its, as a census to all of its undergraduates. They gain comparative information, and what we have found is that, in fact, the most valuable unit of analysis is not the campus-wide level, although that's of interest. The really important unit of analysis is at the level of the major or various subgroups, so Asian Americans or Vietnamese background. These kinds of abilities to drill down with the census data is really what makes the data valuable, and its ability to compare it with like institutions, research universities. And so the other element that we are now beginning to look at is, since we have the structural ability to do a survey, the undergraduate levels, is to also look at a graduate level survey as well. So we're in the process of developing that. So what I do want to mention is that some of you know here in the audience is that we are looking to see if we could have some collaborations with a number of Asian major research universities in Asia, probably just Chinese language institutions, and we also have a similar initiative in Europe as well, with interest from Oxford and Utrecht and a number of major institutions in Europe as well. So, what is the advantage to our survey design? And I say this in part because I know Tsinghua has been doing a version of what is called NESI in the United States, and it's doing interesting work. So, but I don't, my knowledge level isn't as deep as it could be. But I do want to note some of the things that we're doing. Again, one, our survey is census and web-based approach. Sample surveys doesn't give you the data to be able to drill down and use it for policymaking. So as I said, drilling down is really important. Survey questions are designed for the research university environment, so questions about research engagement, civic activity, just a variety of things that make the survey very focused on the research university environment. Ability to customize. It's not a set survey. We customize it for each institution. We have a core set of questions, but it's a collaborative project in which we work together with our members. Comparative analysis then comes out of that. That is, again, as I think I said before, useful because it really is comparing kind of apples to apples. But really the comparison is that we find mostly useful, as I said, is not the campus-wide level. It's what's happening in engineering in Minnesota or Michigan versus Berkeley, and I would assume presumably with some of our major our partners if we develop them in Asia and Europe as well. And as I said, we were integrating this into both scholarship, and we have models for using that data in actual institutional policy making. And one of the things we have developed out of this is is something called the academic profile, so that you can go online and you can, those who are selected and are part of our membership can easily navigate through the data. They don't have to be geniuses in programming in order to figure it out. And here's the general design of that survey. We have a set of core items that are given as a census, and then we have a series of modules that focus on various components that we've agreed upon among our consortium members. And one of the things that we do that's very powerful here at UC, and with it that we can do in the U.S. context as far as we can integrate it with other institutional data. So we integrate it with grades, and class size, and other kinds of things that really add tremendous power to our ability to look at the data and, as I say, drill down to various subgroups. So how do we use this data? And I don't have too much more to go. Basically, as I said, one of its biggest uses is at the program review level, and Berkeley has been a big champion of this. It uses it extensively in that process. It's used in presentations to our Board of Regents, which is the board for the entire UC system, on all kinds of issues from learning outcomes to diversity. We've had special items that actually have lent to understanding the market for certain the degree programs and these kinds of things, degree programs that are being considered by the university to develop. It's used extensively in our Senate faculty committees, things from admissions policy to our research committee is very interested and has used the data relating to, well, how engaged are students in research in the University of California. Student service evaluation, various task forces, campus and program accreditation in terms of this kind of external side of it, national accountability. It's part of a recognized national accountability structure through the U.S. Department of Ed, and in various research venues and that kind of thing. So we're very excited about how this is developing, and it's a tremendous opportunity to learn from each other, we've found. And now I'm going to just give you a little sample as like a little tip of the iceberg. Well, what's some of the data that comes out of this? Well, I'll tell you, it's really a broad range, and this is only a sample. As I noted before, admissions policy in measuring learning outcomes, both at the campus level it's being used, but it's also an integral part now of an accountability report that comes out of the Office of the President. As I noted, research engagement. We're looking at issues about more complex issues and about the role of cultural, economic, and ethnic diversity at the university. What's the role of parental education background to understanding behaviors of students, and similarly related to their social engagement. We're more and more concerned with rising fees about the impact on affordability, and we're just really beginning now to take a look at that issue. We're also concerned about what we call as campus climate, and that means how do students feel they belong in the institution? Are there certain subgroups, African Americans, perhaps certain categories of Asian Americans, there's so many, that do not feel that they belong or don't feel there's a critical mass. So we're trying to understand that issue, and it's very important to us that we have a sense of inclusion and support for students. So this is an important part of what we're looking at. So what I want to note to you is, it's really amazing how little universities generally know about who their students are. We have some general markers, and we have known things about race and ethnicity for some time. This chart simply gives a sense of what the overall different groupings are. And as you notice, it isn't only 4 categories, but it's just a sampling of this really tremendous, diverse racial and ethnic group of students that we have at the University of California. And we really need to look at not just broad categories, but as I said before, being able to drill down and take a look at those students and what kind of behaviors they have. And I'll tell you one thing that really blew away a lot of people once we first started generating this data was how many students at the University of California have immigrant backgrounds. So at Berkeley, for example, around 76% of all the undergraduates have at least one parent that's born outside of the U.S. So this is truly an immigrant university. And that's an important thing to know if we're understanding the behaviors of students. It tells us a lot about their what majors they perhaps like to get into. It's a very complex issue. And this is just a sample of some of the campuses and showing you the really high percentage of immigrant background students. This is just another slice of that. We can drill down and look at all kinds of different ways of what's happening to these students, for example, what field of study they're in, and we see some correlations that, of course, we would expect that perhaps immigrant students tend to focus more on careers that look like they will directly lead to a job. And so that careerist approach is a major factor here, and that should inform us somewhat about our curriculum, how we're trying to shape these students. Then, as you can see, another point of a source of data is the difference between the Asian community. This is system-wide data for the entire UC system, taking a look at how many of these students are from immigrant backgrounds, and of course the Asian population is very high. But you know what, we even found out that actually there are a lot of students from Euro-American or white background that have immigrant backgrounds as well, as you can see, perhaps a larger percentage than anybody really realized. So this again emphasizes the really strongly immigrant background of students. Another area we look at is something called academic engagement. How often do they do their homework, to more complex questions. And one of the things that we found is, there indeed is a real difference between students of different socioeconomic classes and how much time they spend studying, for example. And what we find is low-income students generally are much more actively engaged in time spent studying and various other kinds of interactions with the campus in terms of academic engagement. Another area, as I noted, is UC system-wide research participation, and we can look at by major, we can go to other kinds of ways to drill down. But we have found basically that the University of California has a very high rate, comparatively nationally, of research engagement. As you can see, around over 44% or 45% or so of STEM majors are in research, and I guess you might expect a much higher range, but we also see a lot more that are involved in the humanities and social sciences, and that's a goal of our institution. We want more research engagement, so we're using this data to kind of take a look at where are the hot spots, what campuses or what programs are best engaging students in research in various ways, in courses or getting paid or these kinds of things, and looking for best practices because we do think that this is an important part of being an undergraduate at the University of California. Then there's questions about where do they think they're going? Why are they getting these degrees? Now this is all 4 years at census, and so that's, I'm almost there. It's census, so you're basically getting it all 4 years, but you could look at the senior year versus the freshman year. Then this is this one about where student serves. We're also looking at civic engagement. How much did they participate in, say, in assisting school districts? Students often work at schools as teaching assistants, these kinds of things, or working in community service in some form. And then finally, that we look at learning outcomes, and this is a major area that we have these categories that we're looking at learning outcomes and trying to understand more generally what kind of patterns we see. This is self-assessment by students, so there's you have to be careful with that data. It's what the students assess, but we were finding that there are very high levels of self-assessed learning outcomes from their freshman year to their senior year. And so finally, all I want to say is that I hope there could be some opportunities perhaps that Tsinghua and Berkeley and our consortium could collaborate more in this endeavor and learn from each other. And thank you very much.